Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Notes and Quotes podcast. And if this is your first time here, welcome, welcome, welcome to the community. And I'm really happy to either have you back or here for the first time. So today we're diving into mental health. Now, mental health has been a very hot topic in the past couple years. I mean, for very good reason, because just like physical health, mental health is extremely important. But I kind of feel like we, as at least Gen Z, but really as a generation as a whole, just humans, tend to get a lot of their mental health knowledge from social media, from online, from hearsay. And I feel like we don't go to professionals as much as we should. So today I decided, why don't we change that? So I have a very special guest on today, and I'm going to introduce you guys to who she is. So we are now going to be talking to Dr. Janelle Chase-Mayers. She is the CEO of Reengineering Wellbeing Consultancy. She's a trailblazer in the mental wellness field, revolutionizing mental health approaches in the Caribbean and beyond. As a mental health consultant, educator, certified grief recovery specialist, and transformational speaker, her groundbreaking work includes the development of mental health toolkits, Caribbean-centered resources, and innovative solutions like genetic testing for personalized care. With an impressive 20-year tenure in education and a commitment to corporate wellness, grief management, and holistic health, Dr. Chase-Mayers continues to empower individuals, communities, and organizations worldwide through transformative programs and visionary projects like the Fit Chick movement and the Yellow Wellness Garden Project. So definitely a professional we have on today, and I'm so excited that you decided to come on, Dr. J. So thank you so much.
Thanks so much for having me, Naomi. I'm so excited about this podcast and for us to
Oh,
talk
yay!
about a topic I absolutely love. And you're absolutely right in your introduction. A lot of people, I call it pop psychology.
Mm,
They're getting their information from the TikTok world
yeah,
and the IG worlds, and they're
yeah,
actually not spending time in learning more about the one thing that perhaps all of us need to really master as we get older.
yeah, absolutely. And I mean, I think it's mixed with mental health being a big topic now, but it's not being handled in the correct ways. So I don't know, that's where I think you come in, because I myself don't even know all the ins and outs of mental health in the ways that you should, besides what I see being fed to me on social media all the time.
Yeah.
So before we jump into the conversation, do you want to share your quote of the day?
Yes, so my quote is, "You cannot lead what you do not know."
Okay.
That
Tell
is
me a
my
little
quote.
bit about that.
That's a personal quote. I'm big on the fact that so many leaders are in positions of leading people and spaces, and they don't have the relevant information or they don't have the relevant tools.
Mm,
And sometimes the reason why things don't work is because leadership is poor and they,
mm,
they really haven't spent time learning about a situation, on unpacking things, or speaking with other people who may be a little bit more knowledgeable than them. And we
yeah.
can do harm when we're leading things that we do not know. And I think that's one of the biggest things in mental health. There's so many people in leadership positions in mental health who they don't know. They
Mm,
don't know the ins and outs. They don't read. They're not looking at the current trends. They're not paying attention to how some trends may actually be harmful for people. They don't understand the history of the work that is happening, in the Caribbean specifically. I struggle with that because a lot of people don't even understand, when I'm teaching my students as a mental health educator, that diagnoses really come at a cost for Black people in the Caribbean.
yeah.
Slaves, like there was something called drapetomania, which was a disorder that if a slave ran away, he would be labeled that.
What? Wait,
Yeah.
what does that mean though?
Drapetomania is the disorder where people who are slaves run away from slavery. I
Oh,
kid you not. That's a real thing. So
oh
yeah,
my
so like,
God.
yes. So like sometimes we really have to think about, or in Jamaica, a lot of the asylums were created for people who were revolutionary
Hmm.
in ending slavery and getting governments to work collective together. They were put into asylums because they were troublemakers. They weren't put
Yeah,
into asylums because they were mad.
yeah.
I mean, there's history, and that history is so rich. So, but yet we have people who lead organizations or make decisions that ultimately can harm us because they're not specific to who we are as Caribbean people. So
Yeah.
that's why that quote is so important to me.
Wow. No, I mean, I fully get, like, you've encapsulated the quote in such a way that I wouldn't have even imagined it, and it
Mhm.
makes so much sense, and it makes me wonder a lot of things. One of them being like, why don't people take the time to do the research, especially because mental health has become such a big topic?
Mhm. So that's a really good question. I'll tell you two reasons why people don't take the time to do research. I've
Mm-hmm.
been teaching for 20 years.
Mm-hmm.
Students don't like to read,
Yeah. Yeah.
and they
That's so
don't
true.
like to do research papers.
Yeah.
So you're not going to have somebody continuing education after they leave University of Louisiana. Sorry, I'm calling all these schools that I teach at. University of Louisiana at Monroe. Shout out to my alma mater, University of West Indies, or community college. Like
Yeah.
they're already coming from a place of deficit. So when they
Mm-hmm.
get into the field, reading and continuing education and researching about something is not something that people really want to do. And two, to research will also mean that you have to unlearn what
Mm.
you've learned.
Yeah.
And some people are not willing to do that just yet. This is how it works. This is how we do it. We've always done it like that. But the thing about our mental health and our brain health, if we use that as an interchangeable language, the
Mm-hmm.
thing about it is everything is changing so rapidly. Computers, technology, COVID, people
Yeah.
having more autoimmune disorders. So that's going to impact the way in which your brain is forming thought, conversation,
Mm-hmm.
things like that. And we have to really stay abreast of that. Lack of sleep, people don't sleep well. So, how does sleep impair people's brain? Or their brain or their thought processes. So you got to get accustomed to
Mm-hmm.
what's happening out there. I literally have like 12 books here to show you, like, here, like, we people need more information, and to get more information means that you sometimes have to unlearn and relearn what
Yeah.
you learned before, or be curious about what's happening or what are the new trends.
Mm. Those are some really good perspectives. I think the unlearning point is what really stuck out to me, because when you're learning new things, you're thinking, okay, I'm adding to my knowledge that I have all the time, but you don't really think about the knowledge that you might be shifting and changing from what you already know. And
Absolutely.
it leads me into one of my other questions. So, even though mental health has become a very big topic today, do you think that some people, maybe because of the lack of knowledge that they have and the lack of research, are people doing better at managing their mental health, or do you still see a lot of problems within that sphere?
I think it's twofold. I do think that because there's more awareness of mental health as a topic, and I'll
Mhm.
I'll do what I do normally when I'm having a conversation about mental health, which
Mm.
is give a definition.
Okay. Yeah.
So the mental health I'm talking about is mental health is a state of mental well-being that enables people to cope with the stresses of life,
Okay.
realize their abilities and capabilities, and learning well and working well and contributing to their community. So that's
Mm.
actually the World Health Organization's definition of mental health. When I
Okay.
read it to most people, they're like, I didn't see it that way,
Mm.
and I'm like, but that's most of the time people are having different conversations about mental health.
What
So
do
like
most
even if
people
you
think it is?
they most think it's about mental illness. And
Okay.
if you go in
Okay.
the World Health Organization, it talks about mental health is more than the absence of mental disorders. Is a complex continuum of the
Mhm.
things that we do in our life, and we may have stages of our life that may impact us more in our brain health.
Yeah.
And so I think sometimes when we're having this conversation, the greatest thing we can do for people is to make sure that we're having the same definition, we're working on the same definition, because a lot of people just go straight into mental illness and disorders and physical disabilities with regards to how people are thinking. And while
Mhm.
that may be useful, I think sometimes that becomes very destructive when you think that we need to lead the conversation with depression, or we need to lead the conversation with anxiety, but we haven't looked at physiology.
Mm-hmm.
Like I teach history of psychology, modern day psychology, and I always tell my students before psychology was a branch, physics and physiology, they come before psychology. How
Yeah.
is the body going to work and how does the body actually work in relation to the thought process? you
Mm.
know so physiology comes first before psychology. And I always tell
Wow.
people psychology is wild west because people have different theoretical assumptions and they will work through their theoretical assumptions, and they would either dismiss it. There would be certain people that would have certain schools of thought, so structuralism, functionalism, evolutionary psychology.
Mm-hmm.
And it just fit who was being funded the better, who was being funded the best,
Yeah. Yeah.
and who was willing to do the most work. Even I was
Yeah.
telling my counseling psychology students, I said, do y'all even know where counseling psychology comes from? That comes from male psychologists saying that that's the only job that females can have.
Really?
Yes, because it went into intelligence testing. So
Wow.
I'm full nerd out when I'm having this conversation with people, right? So from intelligent testing, there were a lot of females that were doing intelligent testing. And so they felt like if we're going to bring females in, the one thing we'll have them do is talk, because women are nurturers. And that's how counseling
Yeah.
psychology actually started. That's the cusp of it. Yeah.
Wow.
Yes. So I mean, there are a lot of there are a lot of areas that we don't unpack when we want to talk about mental health, that
Mm.
I think we do need to unpack as helpers, as mental health professionals, as parents, as Gen Zs, as you said. Like it
Mm-hmm.
just can't be like, oh, this is why here, and that's like, no, you gotta kind of go down the rabbit hole a little bit to understand why these things that exist and if it makes sense to
Mm-hmm.
you, you know. Yeah.
The history of it, I didn't even know. That's so interesting how intricate it all is and how it leads into how we face mental health today. And you had mentioned Gen Z as well. Gen Z definitely is like the generation who's all about mental health awareness
Yeah.
and spreading, make sure that you go to therapy and all these things. And it's great. But would you
Mhm.
say that they're doing better at managing their mental health, or are there like still some issues that we need to face?
I think the culture that exists, it may appear as if they're doing better with their mental health, but the
Mhm.
framework is, I believe, incorrect or inadequate,
Okay, why is that?
because you cannot have an entire generation be anxious and depressed and they don't even understand what their nervous system is. They
Mm.
don't understand their physiology. They don't sleep properly. They don't eat properly. They don't exercise. So, what we're pretty much doing is just labeling a bunch of young people to have a disorder. And unfortunately, that's not going to improve their mental health and their well being. What it will do is give them a good label, a good name, and they probably will not learn how to manage their body in the first place.
Mm.
I think that is the biggest mistake we're making with your generation.
Yeah.
As I tell people all the time, is like, I'm anxious, but do you understand what your nervous system does? Do you understand what fight or flight is? Do you understand the markers how it's protecting you? And they don't, which tells me how they're being helped is also harming them. Because if you
Mhm.
don't understand how your body works, you cannot treat or fix your body.
Mhm. That makes sense. And it hits home a little bit because it's kind of like everybody always gives the labels, like anxiety, depression, and not to say those labels aren't valid, but I feel like everybody in our generation is very quick to pick one of those and use it
Yeah.
as a justification for how they're feeling without actually thinking about how can I solve this? And the only way for me to actually solve it is to truly understand it to its core.
Yeah.
So is it possible for you to give us like a mini crash course of how our nervous system works so that we can at least have a foundational understanding of it?
Absolutely. I think one of the things, and I teach this in my intro to psych class, and they absolutely hate. I thought I didn't have to do biology anymore. You talk about your nervous system and you separate it into your parasympathetic and your sympathetic nervous system, and
Okay.
understanding how those things actually impact your autonomic nervous system, your peripheral nervous system. So the system that is associated with doing things automatic. So like your breath, regulating your temperature, and then doing things that are not so much automatic, which may be, just the way how you may think about a particular situation. And
Okay.
then there are four responses that I want to talk about that may make life a little bit easier for people to understand. If you think about, you've heard about fight or flight,
Yeah.
so we talk about that response system. Our bodies are hardwired to have that response system. So freeze, fawn, fight, or flight.
Okay.
And different human beings have those different responses to something that may be a threat or a trigger. And what often happens to us as human beings is that we can get stuck in any of those responses, those response states. And being stuck in those response states as we get older is what actually causes or may actually contribute to some of the challenges that people will have with anxious thoughts or an anxious body. We kind of store. So there's this book called The Body Keeps the Score, that like we literally are storing our traumas. And if our response was freeze, which is to a functional freeze, which was to do nothing about the situation, as you get older, that becomes your automatic response to a threat. And so if we want to help each other with managing our anxiousness or managing our anxiety, we need to be aware of how to get out of these particular states. Now, I am a fighter. So if something happens, I gotta be ready. I'm gonna be up and that, But there are different parts of my life that, I was in functional freeze.
Right.
Because I had never experienced it before. It was a lot of trauma to my body. It was a lot of trauma to my mind. And so not being able to move was survival.
What changes it into fight then?
So sometimes it depends. Do you have to protect yourself?
Okay.
So have you ever been in a situation where there's certain people that they're just ready to pop off? And
Yeah.
Like, relax. And there are some people that will not say a word. That's the difference between your fight and your flight. To simplify it, there are other things that are happening. Your hormones are impacted, the time that is happening. But just to give like a very quick crash, as I said, people, if you want to take a deeper dive, always think about those response states. Because here's why. As human beings, we have the capacity to almost shake it off, but nobody teaches us how to shake off those responses. But if you think about somebody in the wild, if you think about an animal in the wild, let's say there's a giraffe moving along, and then a lion comes, and the lion comes and they attacks the giraffe, but the giraffe finds a way to get away. What you'll notice in watching National Geographic is that the giraffe will walk away and they will shake, they will shiver, and then they will continue walking as if they were never attacked.
Yeah. Is that just
Because
shaking?
yes, so they've regulated their nervous system. Human beings, we're not taught to do that. So we store that response as survival.
Wow.
And so a simple thing for us, and I talk about this in my TED Talk, crying. When we're young, crying is a natural response to something that has happened to us. And when that thing happens to us and we cry to release the anger, the fear, or whatever, and we butt an adult who says, shut up.
Yeah.
We're actually dysregulating our nervous system. And if you keep hearing that over and over, you'll learn that crying is not an appropriate response to when something hurts you, but in fact, keeping your mouth shut is. Fast forward that tape when you're 16, 17, 18, and you cannot articulate through voice or body that you're hurting. You're going to end up with something.
Because your nervous system isn't regulated.
Yeah, because the one thing that's supposed to protect you for all the years was not given permission.
Is that where then all of those things like anxiety comes from?
Can start to manifest within people's bodies. Panic attacks, intrusive thoughts.
Those
Absolutely.
feel like such common things as well. Everyone talks about having like intrusive thoughts and,
Yeah.
experiencing an anxiety or panic attack.
Yeah.
Like, it's a universal normal experience. But is that
Yes.
just all of our nervous systems are kind of
It's
messed up?
common, but it's not normal.
Okay.
We've normalized it.
Okay. Wow. Yeah.
Pop psychology has normalized it. The field has normalized it,
Mm-hmm.
but it's not, it's common. We're not,
Yeah.
as human beings, we're supposed to be able to manage our stress, cope with the stressors, and if we need help and support, we go to people who can co-regulate us. That's
Mm-hmm.
why when children cry and they have a loving, nurturing parent, the hold is so powerful.
Mm-hmm.
The hold without words becomes the most powerful thing that they receive because it
Yeah.
says, you're okay, I'm all right, and you're doing the right thing. So we can co regulate each other. What we've done is dysregulated each other. And we do a really good job of it when we send children to school with people who don't understand how the brain works, how the nervous system works.
Right.
You know, we do a really good job of it when we send people to work spaces where people do not take into account that people are human, and that they do need breaks, and interrupting them every minute or asking them to do something that's not enough time and putting them under pressure. So we will end up with more people who struggle with, anxiousness or depression or intrusive thoughts, but that's not normal.
Mm.
We're not designed for that. There's no manual when you look at a physiology book that says that's how we're supposed to end up.
Wow. That I had no idea about. That's like a mind-blowing just realization. Wow. Thank you for that. So, okay, so then what's the difference then between pop psychology and true psychology? Like, what are the problems with pop psychology kind of messing with real psychology?
I think the biggest problem, and I was having this with my students the other day, my master's level students, was you think therapy is what you see on TV.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I'm like, do y'all realize that that's a script? And if you go into insight, it is that script does not make it true or right. So people come in already perceiving, like, one of my biggest pet peeves is that therapy is a safe space. No,
Really?
no, it's not. Pulls goes back here, pulls this book because I was teaching them. And my students is like, Marsha J, no, that's not true. And I was like, let's turn to page 52, right?
Yeah.
And I'm teaching them in groups, and I'll read something here.
Yeah.
Ethical practice demands that group practitioners inform prospective participants of the potential risks involved in the group experience.
Mm-hmm.
The nature of these risks, which include life changes that cause disruption, hostile and disruptive confrontations, scapegoating, and harmful socializing among members, and what the leader can do about them, are the subject of this section. This is the book. And I had
Mm-hmm.
to tell them, listen to me, when somebody comes into therapy, they're not
Mm-hmm.
always going to feel safe.
Yeah.
Our first ethical practice across the board, marriage and family therapists, social worker, psychologist, psychotherapist, because there are many myriads of helping professionals, right? Is to do no harm. What does that
Mm-hmm.
tell you? There's a potential that what you will do, what you will say, how you will engage with the client may potentially be harmful.
Mm. So it's not a
And
safe
so
place.
it's not. I think it's a very sacred place. I think it's
Mm-hmm.
a growth place. I think it's a learning space. But the concept of safety, that you're going to walk out here just thinking that everything is going to be all right. Sometimes the words that we say to people can harm them, and it's not intentional,
Mm-hmm.
but they still feel harmed by it.
Yeah.
If we're confronting as a skill, because confronting and challenging is one of those skills that individual therapists or counselors have to do. Sometimes when you are confronting, you may confront too early,
Yeah.
and that may harm the client.
Mm.
and you have to know how to repair that. So that's one of my biggest things is like, we've kind of watched TV and TV has said this is what it looks like. Also, I think one of the things that is also maybe difficult is that if you're going to therapy or you're learning about your mental health and you don't have new information or you don't understand, if you're not willing to go down the rabbit hole, you're going to only get help based on the person who's helping you.
Right.
But there's so many modalities, right? There's so many in this book alone, there are like 12 to 14 different theoretical practices and frameworks of how to do therapeutic interventions. The person you go to may not be the best fit for what you need,
Yeah.
And that's just from the counseling perspective, So I think it's my biggest thing is to allow people to do diligence and learning more about what they're doing, why they're going into something versus it being a trend. Because
Okay.
it is, to go to therapy now becomes like, girl, you need to go to therapy.
Yeah.
Yeah, but you might also need to sleep too. You
Because my
also might
thing
need
is
to
like,
eat properly too.
yeah, yeah. Because I always hear people saying everyone should go to therapy. Like everyone needs therapy. And I originally thought, okay, that's probably a good point because, everybody should be in tune with their mental health and take a look to see just kind of like regular checkups. So and I equated therapy to being that. But should everyone go to therapy then?
I don't know. I've been a mental health professional for 20 plus years.
Mm-hmm.
I've had many different roles. Worked as an addictions counselor. I'm a trained marriage and family therapist. I'm a psychotherapist. Dual diagnosed certified. I don't think therapy is for everybody.
Really?
Yeah.
Honestly, kind of refreshing to hear.
I don't think everybody needs to go to a professional to figure out what's going on with them. I think
Mm,
we have different modalities. There are somatic practices, you have coaches, and
mm,
trust me, don't get me wrong, you have trauma therapists, you have so many there are different spheres of it.
mm.
And I think sometimes because people don't know the vastness of mental health and different ways to improve your well-being
Yeah.
and not always in a problematic state, we can go to spaces where we then become pathologized. And
Okay.
there's absolutely nothing wrong with you. You may just be having a life experience. You may just be having a life transition. And that life transition may require somebody else that has a better understanding of that challenge over a
Mm-hmm.
therapist. And I'll tell you
Mm-hmm.
why. When I say I am a grief recovery specialist, the beauty of that, we're not therapists when we have, because a lot of people in the field they do certifications so they can become an emotional focused therapist, or
Mm-hmm.
they could become an internal family systems therapist. Like you can
Yeah, it's very
pick and
specific.
choose. Yeah. No, they're like you could be a narcissistic therapist. This is how well west this thing is, right? But I could tell you specifically for grief. Grievers love to talk to people who understand grief.
Mm-hmm.
And as a grief recovery specialist, I can use my particular hat
Yeah.
as somebody who's experienced grief to help the person who's processing their grief. Now, there's certain modalities that don't do that. So
Yeah.
knowing who to go to with what area matters, because sometimes I believe the wrong intervention can send you down a spiral,
Mhm.
especially when you think about the fact that our first ethical principle is to do no harm.
So, okay, wow. So, what then should be the steps that people need to take to do better at bettering their mental health? If it's not just taking all the tips from pop psychology, which would just be, to go to therapy, everyone should go to therapy. If you look at this video and it tells you, oh, if you have these 5 symptoms and you have this, that kind of thing, what are the things that people should be doing?
I think the first thing that people should do in understanding their mental health and well being is understanding the importance of sleep.
Okay.
We're having a lot of challenges with people's mental health because a lot of people don't sleep. So
Yeah.
here's the thing about sleep. Sleep is about restoration, is about repair,
Yeah.
right? And when you don't sleep, you're actually going to harm the way in which you think. So there's something called the glymphatic system. And
Right.
when you sleep, the glymphatic system is what cleans up the junk in the brain. So
Okay.
similar to the lymphatic system, which cleans up the waste
Oh,
in the
okay.
body. And
Yeah.
when you don't sleep, the glymphatic system cannot chomp those intrusive thoughts. They can't erase the bad things that happen in your day. And a lot of people are lacking sleep. And if we think about Gen Zs and we think about teenagers from the ages of 13 to 25, what's one thing they don't do a lot of?
Oh, for sure
Sleep.
sleep. Yeah.
So is there a direct correlation between lack of sleep and poor brain health? Absolutely. So Matthew Walker, Why We Sleep, is a very useful book for people to start paying attention to. He has a lot of podcasts as well too.
Hmm.
I think this is one of the things. Another thing is also food, because our gut health determines our psychological health. Everything starts in our stomach. So if you think about a child's behavior is directly correlated to the nutrition that we give them from the time they're born. They don't
Hmm.
talk to us. They don't say, "Look, mommy, I want some bubby right now." That's not the conversation that they have.
Yeah.
But when they're fed, mood looks different.
Yeah.
And so if we are operating in a space where we don't understand how food impacts our well-being, we're going
Hmm.
to stay stuck. So this book, This Is Your Brain on Food by psychiatrist, nutrition psychiatrist Dr. Naidoo, is
Hmm.
one of the most powerful books that any person should read, not just a mental health professional. But I can tell you this as somebody who teaches in the field. My students don't read this
Yeah.
unless I'm suggesting this is not on our curriculum. So then you think about it, social workers, mental health, other mental health practitioners, what information do they know that can actually help a client improve rather than what a diagnosis may be or what a challenge may be? And
Mm.
it's simple things, how we sleep, how we physically move. That is literally my dissertation, how movement, physical activity, and play influences the interpersonal relationships and mental health of Caribbean mothers.
Oh, wow.
I am
Very
interested
specific.
in the lived experiences of Caribbean women and how we pass on well-being. That's what I
Yeah.
research for my dissertation.
Wow.
Because movement matters, play matters, right? Physical fitness matters. So movement, as in what's your vision for your family,
Hmm.
impacts your mental health or how you think about your mental well-being. What's the physical activity? Gardening, netball, carnival, stuff like that. We don't think about how carnival actually plays a big role in keeping our mental health healthy.
That makes me think about kind of like COVID time when everything was shut down and we didn't a lot of the Caribbean countries, especially Barbados as well, we didn't have crop over, which is our carnival for people who don't know,
Yeah.
um, for that year,
Yep.
and the impact that it had on just the whole nation's mental health.
Yep. Because remember, our crop over season is the end of a season. So then you release.
Yeah,
What are we releasing? The thoughts, the things that are physically stuck to us. But
yeah,
those things impact the way in which we think. Those
yeah.
things impact the way in which we feel. Those things impact the way in which we relate to each other. I always tell people, look at the crime around Krakow. Do you see any? No.
Yeah, it's quite low.
No.
Yeah.
Because people out there enjoying living their best life. They're
Yeah.
having fun. And so my thing about it is that culturally, we don't even look at the fact that culture also dictates the type of mental well-being we're going to have for people or how we view or see mental health. And I haven't gotten into this because this is another layer. But
Mhm.
just from slavery, I tell people when slavery ended, the slave master didn't have therapy, nor did the slave. So
Mhm.
whatever behaviors that were survival behaviors continue to pass on. And we don't understand that. That's why when
Wow.
we look at violence, we see violence as something, ill of society, we don't see violence as a survival mechanism of a society, but that's what it had to be during slavery.
Right. Is that then why, because like you saying that just kind of lit my brain up. Is that why there's more crime rates in Caribbean countries, or like, for how they have a lot of crime rates in, for example, Jamaica or Trinidad, and those two countries had very large revolutions during the enslavement period.
What happened after that? Do you think that people just say, we can just behave now?
Wow.
People just behaviors. So the same way how we talk about intergenerational trauma, that's part
Yeah.
of intergenerational trauma.
Yeah.
And are we providing care or awareness? That's my point of, you cannot leave what you don't know. If you want to have a completely different mental health revolution and you're not thinking about these layers, systems is that's my bread and butter. I'm systems trained. That's what my PhD is in, systems. So I'm looking at all the layers that exist.
Yeah.
And when we're not looking at all the layers that exist, what ends up happening is that we can put a band-aid on something that does not require a band-aid. It may require a bleed out.
Oh, what would a bleed out look like?
Sometimes, especially when you think about people's mental health, we now live in a space where people often get sick before they get well.
Okay.
So there's a lot of pain around certain situations, like when I was in the addictions world, we will call it, people had to hit their rock bottom.
Right. Yeah.
And
Yeah.
the only way you could go for rock bottom is up.
Mm-hmm.
And so we live in a world where, and I have a 16-year-old son, and I talked to him about, I said, with privilege comes responsibility.
Mm-hmm.
We live in a world where entitlement does no longer sees that they need responsibility.
Yeah.
And so when people are not allowed to feel, they're not allowed to hurt. We're always pacifying what's happening to them. I tell parents all the time, I said, I struggle if the first thing when your child says they need help is that you get help from somebody else external to you. What you teach them is, I'm not equipped to help you, so you need to go here. But rather than teaching them that, it may be, let's go together so we can learn together.
Wow. That is such an amazing perspective that I've never heard anyone say before, because so many parents nowadays, because we have normalized a lot of mental health issues, which, comes with its ups and downs, as we discussed. A lot of them are sending their kids to therapy, and anytime there's like a slight problem, they go to the counselor at the school, or they go, to a child psychologist or to a therapist or something. And it's seen as like, how you would get just a tutor for math class. It's like an external kind of, yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
And the reality is, it's not, here's your issue, here's the issue we've created or we're collectively working in.
Yeah. Yeah.
And there's a lot of research on when young children get the wrong intervention, it actually creates a lot more problems for their health markers as they get older, which is unfortunate, which is what is happening in today's society, right? Even there's a psychiatrist, Dr. Daniel Amen. His book is The End of Mental Illness, which I believe every single person should read that book, not just a mental health practitioner. And he had to do, he scans the brain. So the beauty of what he does is he talks about that psychiatry, which is the medical model of mental disorders, right? That doctor understands the entire physiology, they're doctors, but then they go into that specialty.
Right.
Psychiatry is the only field in the medical field that they do not scan the part of the body that they're diagnosing.
They don't scan the brain?
No.
What? Why?
So they do bloods.
Yeah.
Certain markers would tell you certain things. So if your vitamin D level is low, there's a high chance that you could be suffering with depression. There's certain markers, but it just wasn't the thing that came into, it just wasn't the framework
Yeah.
that came into the medical profession for psychiatry. So psychiatrists sometimes are reading blindly.
Does that lead to a lot of misdiagnosis then?
Yeah. And he was talking about the fact, he was telling some psychiatrists, like, be careful how you're diagnosing ADHD too early.
Mm-hmm.
Like, 3 years old is too early,
Right.
just because the child does not sit. So now, you have larger trends. There are a lot of trends that are happening on the world stage of psychological health, psychiatric health, because those two things are different.
Mm-hmm.
Because psychiatrists and, you know, the ones that work in the Caribbean, bless their heart, are overworked,
Yeah.
underpaid, and, they're doing a lot for what they're trying to do.
Yeah.
And so I know there's some that are like, like, we wish that people would get psychological help first, think dealing with their thoughts and their behaviors before they come to us. Because sometimes, and bless their heart, I know some that, will say to somebody, it's like, there's nothing wrong with your child, you
Mm-hmm.
know we just need to put some coping mechanisms here, or, and it becomes one of these things where, like I said, it can be the wild west when we don't have people who are willing to inform, or
Mm-hmm.
people who need to be informed about their medical or their mental health,
Yeah.
so.
Okay. So I am going to try to just kind of concise what you've told us today. So sleep is a big one when focusing on how to better your mental health, the things you eat, the way you move, exercise,
Yes.
that kind of stuff. Also, just understanding the ins and outs of your mental health and also how it relates to your physiology as well, which is something
Yeah.
that I didn't even think about, which is
Mhm.
just, I feel like, revolutionary. Um, and is there anything else that I've missed?
So one thing I will say, this book is also a really good read, The
Mm-hmm.
Anatomy of Wellbeing. And she
Okay.
talks about self-care, how we take care of ourselves is our
Mm-hmm.
self-care. And it talks about intentional practices that you could do. So she does talk about the culinary, understanding your body as the ecosystem. She
Yeah.
does talk about transforming your mindset. And you would have mentioned this in my bio.
Mm-hmm.
This here, we began partnering with Carrie Genetics. Shout out to Karika, who is from Bermuda, and she has created DNA testing for us in the Caribbean.
Really? Oh,
So
cool.
I've done this personally, where I can look at my traits. So
Yeah.
if I took a model of openness, neuroticism, and stuff like that based on my swab, because a
God.
lot of information and a lot of medication that is prescribed was not done on us.
For you.
So
Yeah,
she
yeah, yeah.
so we partner with her. Re-Engineer Wellbeing has partnered with her, where we can actually tell you which medications work better.
That's so cool and so,
They're
so
not like
necessary.
psychedelics for
Yeah.
your fitness. So I think this one is fitness for you, skincare for you. Like, my biggest thing is that, like, we have to really expand the way in which we're helping people with their well-being.
Yeah.
And the ways that happened before, they may have worked, but not for the circumstances that we are now under. If you think about COVID, if we think about digital use, we didn't get into that as a
Hmm.
conversation, but even staying on a computer for too long, right,
Yeah.
can actually
Guilty of
decrease
that one.
your dopamine, your dopamine. And so that instant gratification, it can actually make people sadder, and it can actually make people less motivated. The blue light
Yeah.
on the screen impacts the way in which your body processes information at the particular time. Like, I think, like, we really have to get to the stage where we realize this is a holistic approach to mental health and mental well-being, and not the way in which we've done it, which ultimately is the divide between mental illness and challenges, but really looking at
Hmm.
mental health on a continuum, and a developmental continuum, because mental health for a child is completely different from mental health to an adult. If you think about
Right.
Alzheimer's, and I tell people all the time, how we view Alzheimer's and dementia, I'm like, that's in the same DSM-5 that's in depression and anxiety. So is enuresis, which is bedwetting. That's also a
Really?
psychological disorder. Yes, these things are in, as addiction. These things are in these. This is, if you're in the field, it'll make sense. If you're not in the field, it won't make sense, right? But yeah, these things are. We have to be a lot more informed, and that's why like the genetic testing. Like when I did mine, I was like, ooh, this don't sound. Yeah, this sound like me. Like I wonder if it came from my mother or my father. Like that, because these things are also these DNA traits are also passed on as well too. Your
Yeah.
level of neuroticism isn't just randomly coming from you. Oh, you know which parent will fly off the handle at certain times. So
Yeah.
that's always been my thing, as being in the transformative space, and because I understand the history of psychology and its history of mental health, I know it's not a one size fit all. And
Yeah, of course
unfortunately, in
not.
the Caribbean, we're making it a one size fit all. Well, this person needs to go to therapy, or this person needs to go to, the psychiatrist. Or there are multiple ways in which people can help themselves with their mental health. And the
Yeah.
beauty of it, there's so much there's so much research about physical activity, exercising as the number one thing that can improve mood.
The number one, really?
Research is there.
Ooh, I feel
Go down the
guilty now.
rabbit hole. I tell people, go down the rabbit hole. If you don't believe me, go down the rabbit hole. I mean,
Hmm.
there are certain not steroids, hormones that are activated as a result of you doing difficult movement. So that's
Hmm.
why lifting weights is so important, right? Walking is important. Walking, there's a recent study that talks about walking can actually slow down the process of Alzheimer's and dementia in people.
Really?
So, like,
Cool. Okay.
I encourage people. So, just don't use mental health as like a buzzword. Think about,
Yeah.
what does it really mean when I say mental health? Daniel Amen does a beautiful job. He says he wished mental health would be brain health, and asks people, what is this good for your brain? What you
Mm.
eat, when you don't sleep, the relationships, the pressure that you put yourself under when you're working, you know, is this good for your brain? The toxins, the environments, are you getting enough blood flow for your brain? As you're getting older, are you doing things that will help your brain stay nice and full, or are you doing things that are starving your brain?
Yeah.
The onset of more Alzheimer's and dementia is about inflammation in the brain. They're now calling Alzheimer's the type 3 diabetes, because you can't use the sugar in your brain, and it shrinks your brain.
Oh,
That's what's
wow.
happening. So that's why fats. But people don't understand the correlation between when we had low fat diets.
Yeah.
It's now showing up
Yeah.
because there's something called a myelin sheath that's made out of fat. So when you don't, and I'm simplifying it, there are other areas associated with this, right? But when the myelin sheath is almost like insulation, so
Hmm.
think about like the insulation around a air conditioner.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah.
The insulation, when the insulation does not have enough fat, it starts to break down. And in there are your wires, your afferent and your efferent nerves that take information to and from the brain. And when the myelin sheath
Oh my
does not
God.
have enough coating, it will
Yeah.
start to become haywire. So then people can lose memory, poor information processing speed. And that's my biggest thing. Like, you can teach that. Yeah, I do a lot of mental skills with athletes, and I do a lot of mental skills with seniors. I can teach you through movement and physical activity how to improve your brain. There's a lot of
Mhm.
neuropriming that's happening. There's a lot of neuroscience that's happening. Like, there are certain things like this, like different
Mhm.
activities, different things that take the left brain to the right brain to the information to switch, that we're not tapping into for our mental health and our mental well-being, and that we really need to start thinking about, and being and allow it to be applicable to how we treat or help people on a day-to-day basis. Nothing has to be wrong for you to take care of your brain.
Yeah. I feel like I've just sat here for this entire conversation, just soaking up everything you've said, and I'm just kind of like assessing my own life, my choices, my things that I'm doing, and then thinking about how I thought about mental health or brain health, and just I feel like my entire perception of mental health has been completely shifted in a way that I did not expect at all. So I really, really thank you for that. That's just, I mean, it's just been like an insanely valuable conversation. So thank you, Dr. J. I am going to hand over to you, see if you have any other last words for our audience, anything else you want to share with them beyond all of the valuable information you've given us today.
Other than we need a part 2 because we haven't even talked about metabolic health as mental health, especially in women. But I do want to kind of leave that as a note for women. Sometimes these symptomologies that you are experiencing as you get older are directly linked to your hormonal health. And a lot of women, unfortunately, as they get older, their mental health, they will have more mental health challenges. Not even when they're older, when they're younger, because, we grow up in the Caribbean society where we have bad periods and, people just think that that's normal. But that's the one thing I would probably leave is that, we have to also start thinking about how our hormones control our mental well-being. And for us to be aware of that as women, but also as men who are fathers or, are significant others to people. It would be that, and then start reading about things about mental health and mental well-being as solutions. Start, really thinking about how does this new information help me understand my body better? How does this new information help me think about thoughts differently? There's a lot of information out there, but we don't read. And if you don't read, you won't get new information and you can't change the old behavior. So I would encourage any mental health professional who's listening to this, start reading some more, and any person who's interested in about improving their well-being,
absolutely
start reading. Start learning about your brain, how that works. Start learning about your operating system. Learn about what foods help it. Learn about how you can rewire it. Even learn about the culture that you live in. There's something now that's new and popping up called decolonizing therapy. Like there are layers to this, so get more educated about your well-being.
Oh, I love that. That was absolutely brilliant. And I feel like you've left so many. You're
more than welcome. Thanks for having this conversation. Hopefully it helps people.
I think it really will, because I mean, it's helped me. I there's so much there that you just educated me on. And I feel like, especially because a lot of the audience is people my age. Because that's usually who I targeted to. And I think that that's really valuable for them because of the whole thing that you said about pop psychology and just the misinformation and just lack of information that people have. I think is going to be so valuable. Thank you guys so much for listening to the Notes and Quotes podcast. This episode was so, so, so informational. I feel like it has given just a wealth of knowledge, not only to me, but also to you. I am going to link everything that you guys need to access for your own mental and brain well-being in the show notes, including all the accesses that you need to Dr. J. I guarantee you it's going to be just such a benefit to your life. Anyway, that's all from us today. Thank you so much for listening once again. If you want more from the Notes and Quotes podcast, make sure to check us out on our socials. We're on Instagram, LinkedIn, YouTube, and TikTok. Video exclusively on YouTube. So if you're seeing the video version of this, that would be on the YouTube. And if you want more of me, you can check me out on Instagram at Naomi A. Cambridge. That's all I have for you guys today. I love you so much. I'm going to see you guys again next Tuesday. And have a great day, night, or afternoon, or morning, or whatever, wherever you are. Okay, bye guys.